All right, let's troubleshoot the error. Cannot drop our table because it is being referenced by our view. So this can be an error that you get in ETL or replication when basically what you have is you have a drop table and then a recreate. But what you don't realize is that that table is being referenced by a view or someone creates a view on it. Now, in the case of ETL, one of the things is to always use a staging table as the entry table that you may want to drop. And then when you move the data over to the next, you can always you can then have the view reference the other table. But be careful, because if you change objects, and we'll get into that in a second a lot, if you find yourself altering the table all the time and adding columns, you might want to start considering not using SQL Server. You're kind of missing the point of what SQL Server is actually for. It is a set schema. MongoDB or NoSQL is not. It's a dynamic schema. You can change it all the time. And I think sometimes people don't realize that if you're adding columns a lot, you might not be needing to use a SQL engine. It's just not designed for that. That's not the purpose. But anyway, we'll get into that in a second. So if we're going to create objects that are referenced by other objects, which is a questionable design, if we're going to do this a lot, then I don't think that views should be what references objects like tables. Because if I'm going to be dropping tables, then I don't want to be putting views that then prevent me from dropping tables if it's a part of the normal process. And I'll cover that in a second. And this example here is a table referenced by view. We're going to be limited by recreating objects themselves, right? So if we're going to do this, and I question whether that's a good practice, what we want to do instead of building it this way is we want to first build it where we build the drops and then the creates. What do I mean by that? If I'm going to have views reference tables and these tables are going to get dropped all the time, then what I need to first do is I need to build the drop view, drop view, drop view, drop view, all the referencing views, and then drop the table. That's the first thing I'm going to code. Because what I'm going to have to do, let's say with my ETL, is I'm going to first have to execute all the drops in that order. Then I'm going to have to go in and recreate all of that, right? So there is no other way to really get around it other than, well, I mean, I could go in, I could edit the view and comment thing, oh, it's just going to be a lot more work. It's not really good practice. So the best practice is first create the deletes and then, or the drops, and then create the creates. Okay, in replication or ETL, using truncates over drops only if you can say that no DDL changes will occur. It's a big key. Yeah, we'll use truncates. Okay, but wait a minute. If you're going to use truncates and you change a column, but you can't, that DDL change doesn't get passed, and it needs to drop the object, and then you now have replication as a case in point out of sync. When you try to reinitialize, it's going to try to drop the object, but it can't drop the object. Okay, now you got a problem, right? So, the statement of we may add a column means that you'll have to manually add to the source and destination. And more often than not, that's what happens. I've seen it get out of sync so many times on replication, and that's another thing to be careful about. With ETL, you probably are going to want to manually add that, and that's usually when your data source changes. Again, I cannot stress enough, the best thing for ETL in a dynamic schema is going to be MongoDB or some NoSQL engine. I just would really get away from using SQL Server. I've done a lot of stuff in SQL Server with ETL, but that's data that doesn't change, like the Bitcoin price and the Bitcoin date. That does not change. People aren't going to come up with something else other than the Bitcoin price that I'm interested for that purpose, right? I'm only going to get those two things. But when it comes, and the same thing with stocks, for instance, but when it comes to maybe loan information on mortgages, well, yeah, they add columns all the time. They come up with some new measure, okay? I mean, it's dynamic, so that's better for a NoSQL engine, okay? So I do like views. I think they serve a purpose, but they can add extra work if you have these reference issues, right? So consider using select queries in the application layer or using Entity Framework, guys. I mean, Entity Framework can save you a lot of headaches. Okay, I mean, it really can. And I would say about 80 to 85% of Entity Framework, depending on what you're doing, is going to be more efficient than trying to create your own queries anyway, especially if you don't have a lot of people who know TSQL. Just is. So, and then the other option is just to use a NoSQL engine. But I think that putting the select queries in your application layer or using something like Entity Framework is going to be really helpful in the long run. If you do use views, and I use views a lot, I'm not against views, but I'm using views on objects that I'm not dropping. And that's a key difference. So the way that usually I'll structure my ETL is I'll have that staging entry, then I'll have a table that's kind of what I do is I look at the table, I look at the structure, I look at what's there, and then I have the filter. So let's use loan information. So if I look at loan information, there may be, like, for instance, a person, they list a borrower's Twitter feed. Now, stupid, I don't care about that. So when I get all that filter, I'm gonna filter it down to a table that I have a specific structure of, let's say, borrower information that I'm interested in, and that table does not change. So where do you think my view is going to reference? It's going to be that final stage, right? But if I were to have my view reference the staging table, or the middle table, oh, that's going to be a nightmare, because I mean, they add columns all the time. That's what they do, and it is so annoying. And well, and it depends on the data source, right? Because again, if we're only interested in, like, let's say 2 columns is Bitcoin, or let's say stocks, again, maybe the high and the low for the day, it's not going to change that much. But so just be careful about that. Some solutions to this are, if you're going to go with this design, build the drops and then the creates, and that will save you a lot of overhead.